want to tell you a few things that happened over the summer at the convention that are important for the church. And one of those happens to be a connection to the English district. So in our convention a year ago in Ann Arbor, the English District and Convention adopted a mission funding initiative called 111. And simply what that is every person, every week, $1. And it's not supposed to be sacrificial, it's not supposed to be burdensome, and it involves the young kids to the older adults in the church. Just a quick story about 111. When my congregation rolled it out at my parish, I was gone for a couple weeks, and I came back, and one of my young people came up to me, and he said, "Pastor, do you have a $20 bill?" And I said, "Well, Robbie," I said, "what do you need a 20 for?" He goes, "Well, I got $32. If you give me a 20, I'm good for the whole year." I said, "Robbie, that's not the intention of 111. He goes, "Well, if I give 52 today, I don't got to think about it the rest of the year." I said, "Robbie, that is not the point." But I gave him an A for effort, you know. Well, here's the important part about 111. The LCMS in convention adopted our mission funding 111 model for the entire synodical church. And in November, Pastor Tom Engler from Wisconsin will hopefully be coming to the Council of Presidents to talk about how each district can participate in 111. But I just want to tell you what happened in our district the first year. So we ran a program year from September 1 to this previous, just past September 1. And we have 60 congregations of 163 churches that are participating in 111. And of those 60 churches, we generated an additional $54,000 for missions. Every single dollar went to missions. We don't keep any at the district office. You know, and we split those equally between our Dominican Republic Lutheran Mission down in the Dominican Republic, where we are a partner, and then we also supported in Lidditz, Pennsylvania, a mission plant out to the Amish. Now I heard you say you got something going on to the.
Yeah, we're going in December. We're going to Amish country to do. They have it's a bus trip basically overnight.
Sure.
There's a couple of Christmas programs that they have, so we've got a group of, right now it looks like 39 people that are going.
What city are you going to? Well, of course, that's where all the Amish live.
Yeah.
That's right by Lidditz. Lidditz is right by Lancaster. And we used to in the eastern region. So when I became an English district pastor in 2000, I'm part of the eastern region geographically, and that region, my first couple of years, met in Lancaster. And so, as this week, Pastor Weldon and I will be in Michigan in our regional. We have some free time that they build in for the pastors to have some socialization with each other. And we used to go out and try to evangelize to the Amish cows. And the problem with that is this, just know this, don't do this when you go there, okay? Because the Amish don't like you messing with their cows. You know, my friend Dale Castor, you know Dale. My friend Dale Castor, who's a missionary in Prague today, we used to just drive around Lancaster County and just you know, sightsee. Well, one time there was a bunch of Amish cows up there, so Dale got out of the truck and he decided to preach to the cows. He said, "Now cows, rise up and accept Jesus as your Savior." And here comes the Amish guy with a shotgun. Oh. You wouldn't think that the Amish, they're not, you know, Amish aren't violent people, but you don't mess with their cows. You know. But so 111 has been adopted by the Synod, and I'm so thankful that the English District is a leader in the Synod in this. And just to give you an idea from a perspective, when Tom Engler ran 111 as a model with the numbers in the English District, every person, and we cut it in half, saying that only half the people would participate. When you put those numbers to the Synod, we could generate over $750,000 a year additional for missions if the program operates the way that we project that it's going to operate. And so, you know, this is really a wonderful thing for everybody to participate in. And I got to tell you, it really is a joy on my heart when I come to church and I'm standing there in line and I see the little ones, you know, a little one, not Robbie, the one who won a 20. Get him out of this, but you know, the little one. Put the dollars in there. So that's one of the things that's going on both in the English District and in the Synod. Another thing in our district, and we are blessed, the Lord sometimes opens the doors, and we're planning a new church in Clarksburg, West Virginia. And yes, you should be just as surprised as I am when you hear the word West Virginia. There is little to no exposure of the Lutheran Church in the state of West Virginia. And so Clarksburg is about an hour and a half, 2 hours south of Pittsburgh. And it's a long story how it came up, but I got asked by my circuit visitor to go down there and just look at this little church. They got 12 members, 12 people that have been coming to this preaching station. So the board of directors accepted them in as a mission. Last week Saturday, They were commissioned as a church in the English district, and this week, through a lot of different talking and whatnot, we found a guy, Pastor Amadeus Gandy, who is going to be called on Reformation Sunday to be their pastor. And so they will be full-fledged church, and they'll have a pastor down in Clarksburg, and we're just thrilled. Simultaneously, and not connected to that situation, in Pittsburgh, the city of Pittsburgh, the Hazelwood neighborhood, we have another church plant going on there. I mean, I know a lot of times you probably hear or see our shrink not going to church anymore, and that's a true reality. But that doesn't mean God's church is dead in any way whatsoever. We have another church plant going on out in Arizona, in Tucson, and we're thrilled about that opportunity that's happening in partnership with the Pacific Southwest District, and it's really taken off. One of our SMP pastors is assigned to that congregation, and we're thrilled about that opportunity. And it's really great to see God's people come together and to serve, the Lord in the church and proclaim the gospel. But those are the days for me in terms of the church. Also, I've been a part of this. I know your congregation has been a part of this, about partnering together to serve in a local area, in sometimes collaboration and in merger situations. My own parish is a merger of mother church and a daughter church back in 2008. And it's kind of ironic because you have the mother church who planted the daughter church 60 years ago, and now we were in a position where through deaths and some other attrition that was going on, we were just struggling in many different ways, and we merged the church together. It took 2 years to do it, and the church today is strong. And we're so thankful that God does those things. I think sometimes we get afraid that when we redo ministry or when we shut doors of one building, that somehow we're failing. And I think that's just so crazy that we automatically think where God shuts one door, we forget his promises, he'll do what? Open another one, And I think sometimes we put too much emphasis on ourselves, and we forget that God's in control, and that he guides, he leads, and he strengthens us in his grace and his mercy. And so we're just thankful. We have a lot of great situations going on in the district, and I can tell you that we are very stable in the district. You hear a lot of problems financially, but by God's grace, we're doing pretty good. I'm thankful for what's happening. I will say that I think ultimately in the big picture, and Pastor Walden addressed this morning, I think, and I appreciate it. Churches sometimes get into a rut, and they forget that we're part of a greater whole, and we're part of a bigger body. We're a part of a partnership that is not just, we're not by ourselves. And I love to tell people that if you've ever seen any of these great war movies, or some of these new movies like Lord of the Rings, whenever the army is being beaten by the evil empire, over the hill, the bright light starts to shine, and the cavalry comes rolling over the hill, and they come and they wipe, and that's what you need to know about your own situation here, is that there is a cavalry that if need be, we blow the horn and they come running. And that's important because you're not alone. You're not alone here. And that's important for both you and your pastor, because one of the things I get the question all the time, well, what's the purpose of the district? We don't need the district, and that's all well and good for churches until they have problems. And it's true that the district's strength generally is to support churches when they're having issues. Legal, organizational, just in general for mission help, for education. Gail Holzer, our education executive, she's one of the best in the land. And so those are the supportive services we bring. And I think ultimately churches they sometimes forget that. I know when I was in the parish as a member, before I became a pastor, I didn't even know that the English district existed. I was a Michigan district boy. The Michigan district probably been one of the biggest districts in the LCMS. When I got my call, I heard Our Savior in Mount Lebanon. I didn't hear Pennsylvania. I didn't hear English district. I thought they were sending me to Israel. My minor at the seminary was Muslim studies, and so I thought the seminary was sending me to Israel to convert all the Muslims, And then I looked down and I saw Pennsylvania. Oh my goodness, what is that? And then I saw English district, and I thought I was joining another church body or something. But come to find out, it's a blessed place to be, the English district being a non-geographic district, and I've been in the English district my whole ministry, and so I'm just joyful and thankful at that opportunity. But I want to give you some time if you want to ask questions about the district or synod. I mean, everywhere I go, inevitably somebody's got a question I never thought of. So please feel free to ask whatever you want. Here's your chance. See, you never had a district president before. You can just fire away. Anything you want to know about district and synod, about the church, whatever you got.
Come on, David, you always have a question.
I'm gonna say, why are you gonna come on me first?
Hey, let me tell you something. To whom much is given, much is expected. Hey, like that. That's a direct quote right out of the good book.
All right, let's see, what can I say? Into the Missouri Synod District, Missouri Synod Church?
Yeah,
Even
you
though
know.
I'm part of it.
Yeah, you mean the
Why are
geographic,
we,
the G.
why
Yeah.
are we, why are they keeping us separate?
Right. So, you know, and let me just say this before I answer that. This question is asked of me pretty much everywhere I go. So this is a very normal question. Not under my watch.
Okay.
I mean, you know, I don't see it happening under my watch. I think part of the problem is people don't truly understand what the English district is.
What's the need for the English?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's probably a better question in the sense of, you know, will we be assimilated? The answer to that one is I don't see it happen under my watch. However, you know, what's the need of it? So English is one of two. We have two non-geographic districts in the Missouri Synod. One of them is SELC, which is the Slovak district, and the other one is the English district. And as you can imagine by the name, they both came to the Missouri Synod as their own synods. So they became in fellowship. The Slovaks were Slovak-speaking people, and the English Synod was the English Evangelical Lutheran Church who spoke English in the United States to Germans, basically. That's what it amounted to. And so in 1911, it became a district in the Missouri Synod, okay? And so the Missouri Synod said, since you're already organized in such a way, we're going to keep you your own district. And I actually think it was wise of the Missouri Synod to do that, because as Pastor Weldon can tell you, the English district has a unique culture amongst the pastors and amongst just the district in general. Because we are non-geographic, and because we don't get together as regularly as you would in a geographic district, we have less fights among us brothers. No, and I mean that with seriousness. We don't have a lot of time together, so the time that we spend together is brotherhood and it's fellowship. I mean, when you say there's less kind of controversy and much more brotherhood. So to the question, why do we keep it? One of the things that the English district has always done for the Missouri Synod, and my predecessor, Dave Steckholz, if any of you remember Dave was, he coined this understanding that we are the safety valve of the Missouri Synod. And what that means is, you know, in the Missouri Synod, you have a spectrum from A to Z in terms of practice in the church, in terms of some theological nuances. And so the English district is a place where a church can be a part of a district and because of geography, be out on an island with the geographic district. I'll give you an example of that. We have a church out in Moses Lake, Washington, the state of Washington. We have one church in the state of Washington that sits dead center in the state. Moses Lake is dead in the middle. The reason they became English district is because they were a break-off church of the local Moses Lake church that was a Northwest district. And from a theological perspective, they weren't getting along with the Northwest district. And so in order to remain, because they wouldn't let this church start, the Northwest district would not let them become a congregation. So in order for them to become a congregation, they sought out the English district, we chartered them, and now they're doing fantastic. They meet in a school, and they've grown over the last 2 years so much so that they have 2 schoolrooms now that they have permanently during the week, and they're getting to the point where they're trying to build a building. They would not exist today without the English district, you see? And so the English district really, and this SELC, by the way, they play the same kind of role. We are a safety valve. We take in congregations, and we give congregations back. Just a little bit of a statistic here. My predecessor, Dave Steckholz, told me that when the English district became a district in the Missouri Synod, it was twice the size of the Michigan district and the Texas district, which means English had 800 congregations as a member of the English district. We gave up about 200 of those congregations to start what's now today the Southeastern district, which is the Baltimore, Virginia, DC kind of area. That's the Southeastern district. And then in the 70s, when the Missouri Synod had the controversies over scriptural inerrancy, we lost another 150 or so congregations that went to the ELCA and the like. So the English district, when it became a district in Synod, was, for a while, the largest in Missouri. Today we have 163 churches, and the district sizes today, we have 35 districts. You have 56 is the smallest, I believe, and the largest is 400. So English sits kind of right in the middle. We're not anywhere near the smallest, and we're not anywhere near the biggest. So when you have 4 tiers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4. English flip-flops between the top of tier 2 and the bottom of tier 3 in terms of where we fit in the synod. And so we're not insignificant in that way. And so the idea, and when people ask me that question, well, why don't we just assimilate you to the geographic districts? I don't know if any of you know this, but some of the geographic districts are really struggling to even survive. One of those is the Eastern District is having some problems geographically. And so you have that whole northeast corner of New England, New Jersey, Atlantic, which is the city of New York and parts of New York, and then the Eastern District, which is all of Pennsylvania and parts of New York. At one time, that was all one district of the Missouri Synod. It was all one Atlantic district. And then they broke off into 4. Well, now we're at a stage in the life of the church where they should probably all go back into 1. When's the last time you've ever gotten Lutherans to work together? You see what I mean? So I do think that there's a need for the English district, I think, and the SCLC district. But I also think that when the question, and I'm not saying this about your question, but when that question is asked at the synodical level, it's always asked from a selfish perspective. It's always asked by the geographic district presidents who just want the congregations as a part of their district. You see what I mean? I mean, because here in Ohio, we have 2 circuits in Ohio, and the Ohio district would pick up 12 to 14 congregations as a part of their district if ours just assimilated in. Well, who wouldn't want that to be a part of their district, especially when you have the revenue and the people that come along with it? You see what I mean? But in terms of it happening under my watch, the reason I say that it won't likely happen is, first of all, it has to happen at a synodical level, meaning that at a synodical convention it has to happen. I take that back. The English district in convention could vote to dissolve. We could do that. But the synod can't force us unless the synod, as a convention, passes a resolution to do a redistricting. Then they can force us. But our agreement with the synod when we became a district was that the synod could never force us to dissolve. We would only be the ones to achieve it. I will tell you this, and you were there when I was elected the first time, right? And then one of the brothers here said he was a delegate that time? Richard was. Richard, you were there. Okay. I said in my speech when I was elected that if the English district ceases to make a contribution to the church, the greater church, if we no longer are, a part of doing ministry and we're just taking up space, in my speech I was very clear. I would be the first one to put the resolution forward to dissolve the English district. I'm not afraid to do the right thing, even though it's not popular. But again, I don't see it happening. I don't see it happening. And the other reason I don't see it happening is, this 1-1-1 program, the synod adopted the English district program. The synod adopted what we're doing in the district. And so that's another reason. But I gotta tell you something, just so you know, almost every council of presidents meeting that I go to, almost every one of them, somebody brings up dissolving the English district. And they do it to just get me going. You know what I mean? It's like, you poke the bear. Yeah, you just poke the bear and watch the bear roar. So you'll love this. One meeting in February, we were down in Tennessee, and I vowed to myself I wasn't going to speak during the meeting, because I participated, and I'm not going to speak. Well, about the 3rd day, one of my buddies in the council, President Hagan from Missouri, he found out that I made this promise, and he was doing the devotions up front. And at the end of his devotions, he said, "I've heard that President Hardy has vowed silence during this meeting." He said, "I move that we dissolve the English district." And I grabbed my bag and I said, "I'll see you guys next meeting." I just walked out. I got my car and I drove home. I was not going to get lured in to breaking my vow of silence. And they do it to me every meeting. So it's a good question, and I'm asked it every time, everywhere I go. Very good. Other questions?
Yeah, we're glad to have you in our district as opposed to the mission district. You're gonna be a lot better person because of that.
Well, I tell you, I'm depressed this morning. Michigan lost to Penn State last night, so I'm actually in mourning. You can't see it, but I was up late last night watching that game. And the ironic part is I live in Pennsylvania now. I've lived there for 19 years. And one of my first confirmand, the first young man that I ever confirmed in the church, is a pastor now in my district in Michigan. And he's a Penn State graduate. And so his grandfather used to take me to the games all the time when they were in Happy Valley. Well, I'm 4-0 when I'm present in the Happy Valley, Michigan playing Penn State. Well, the last 2 times, this year and 2 years ago, they didn't invite me. and Michigan got trounced 2 years ago. And they lost 28-21 last night. But don't worry, the big one's coming at the end of November, so, you know. Yeah, I grew up right outside of Ann Arbor. My dad was, worked for Amtrak trains, and so we grew up with, Bo Schembeckler in the big house, so. That's I'm actually from Frankenmuth, the great German settlements of Frankenmuth, Frankenhill, Frankenmeyer, and Frankentrost. And great-grandma Chloa, my grandmother, the German grandmother, my grandmother has 100 first cousins. So whenever I go back to Michigan, to one of our churches in Michigan, inevitably somebody will come up to me and say, well, Grandma Hardy told me you were going to be here. Who are you? You know, I don't even know who you are. You know what I mean? So, yeah, no, it's a blessing. But you take this Michigan boy and you put him in Penn State, and I was a wrestler, and now Penn State has the best college wrestling in the country. Iowa used to have, but Penn State now dominates that. They've been a national champion the last 6 out of 7 years. So it's ironic how the good Lord decides to put us in places and ask us to serve, right, brother? I mean, it's crazy.
It is.
It's crazy. Okay, what else? Theology, district senate, whatever you want. Here's your chance.
There you go.
Okay. Well, I really don't want to be the only one speaking. Do we have issues with homosexuality, same-sex marriages, and stuff like that in the district?
Well, let me ask you a question before I answer it. When you say we, who is we?
We as a district, I should say.
Well, let's speak we as a synod, because that's a, you know,
It seems to be the sin of vogue right now.
Well, here's
call it here.
Yeah, here's what I'm gonna say. Nothing when it comes to sin is vogue for me, because before God, all sins are equal. Okay? I will tell you that I think, yeah, there is a societal focus on certain things. Yeah, well, on both ends of the spectrum. So you have a societal push to be open to everything, and then you have this societal push to tell people they're gonna go to hell, you know, from a religious standpoint. And I think, you know, we have some hot button issues, right? Abortion is still top on the list of all Christians. And you know, whether you like President Trump or whether you don't, the one thing I will tell you about him is he's been good for the church. What I mean when I say good for the church is he's defended the church. Under President Obama, the church was preparing a war chest financially to defend ourselves in the public square in legal cases where the government was trying to tell the church what to do. And by the way, we're still preparing that war chest because that day will eventually come. It's not like because Trump was elected, it's gone forever. No. We just have a reprieve right now. And it's not necessarily related to President Trump. I think it's more associated with the fact that when he was elected, the Republicans had both House and the Senate and a Republican president. So now that the Democrats have the House, you see these bills now coming back out, trying to force the church to do things that are against our code. On the other hand, I will tell you that kind of societal push to be accepting of homosexuality and all these other things, and to call anybody who would not accept it hateful, is the way that they're going after the church. Let's be clear, the government is not gonna go directly after the church. The government is gonna seek to get to the church by way of sneakiness, right? And let me give you an example of this. Pastor Weldon and I, as called servants of the church, fall under what's called the clergy housing allowance. And what that means is we, all ordained pastors who serve in a called church position, do not pay federal tax on our housing, whatever portion of our housing that we have. The Democrats have had it in the Senate when they controlled the Senate, and now in the House to get rid of that. Now, you might think to yourself, okay, what is that gonna do to the church? Okay? Think about this for a second. If that happens to those who serve the church, that's effectively a 25% pay cut. Now, does that affect the church? The answer is not necessarily immediately. But how does that affect the church?
People aren't gonna go into ministry.
That's one thing, yeah. I'm not even gonna go there. That's the long-term goal. The long-term goal is to make the ministry so unappealing for people from a societal perspective and a professional perspective that nobody's gonna wanna do it. So let's just use that as the underlying current, but that's the long-term goal. The short-term goal by doing that would be, how does that affect the church? Well, it affects the pastor for sure. I mean, effectively, a pastor gets a 25% pay cut just by snapping his fingers. But how does that then affect the church? Pardon me?
Your revenue's taxable.
Well, See, you're a smart gal. Are you the treasurer here or something?
You wanna be?
Yeah, you're right.
She's right. Because the next thing on their docket is, they want to take away the tax deductibility of donations to the church. Some experts, not in the Missouri Synod necessarily, because we're a part of what's called the Alliance for the Defending Freedom, which defends all kind of conservative Christian positions. They've estimated that it could decrease offerings up to 40% if that gets through the House and the Senate. Because if you take away the deductibility, especially for those churchgoers that kind of, and let's be honest, it's stewardship, but in some respects, it's a part of their own, they own their own businesses. And so the easiest deduction for them is to give their gifts to their own parish, and then they can deduct it off of their business, and that's a good thing for them. I mean, and so when they do the study, they look at it, and so by de facto, if they change the tax laws, they're actually going after the survivability of congregations. And so to your question, the Missouri Synod is very clear that, that marriage is between one man and one woman, that God created man, Adam, in the garden, and because he was lonely and needed somebody, God gave him a helper, according to the Hebrew, and that was a woman. And by the way, God's purpose for a woman to be the helper to a man is, read Genesis 3, what is the purpose?
Procreate.
You said it, I didn't, but it's true. And we don't talk about that in society. See, it's because nobody cares about what God's word says. We deal with how we feel, right? God made a man and a woman to reproduce. That's the reason. Sexual union is the centerpiece of marriage when it comes to why God created a man and a woman. And so, yes, the church holds fast to this, and not in my lifetime. I mean, Missouri is pretty strong on this. I
Yeah,
mean,
they're strong. In fact, that's the question that comes up, and we've talked about it before, is that each time there is a resolution that basically says, we stand on this.
strong.
It's strong,
Yeah.
strong, and so, we've talked about, I believe that we've talked about this, and, many times, and especially the aspect of the appropriation and those type of things, these guys know they know where I stand. They know.
Well, and knowing him, I'll tell you that what you hear from him is the position of the church, Missouri. And so, yeah, the district's very strong on this. I mean, I gotta tell you, I have very few congregations that I deal with. You get some members of congregations that are very kind of, they have family members who might be homosexual, and so they have an emotional kind of, a visceral kind of emotional reaction to saying, well, if I say that homosexual marriage is wrong, then I'm saying that my son, daughter, grandson is wrong. That's not the case. Because if you have a heterosexual grandchild or child, and they're living outside the bounds of marriage, they're just as sinful before God as a homosexual. So I really get frustrated with Christians that try to separate sins and make one, much greater than another one. I mean, because God says that, before him all sins are equal. So after church here, when you're talking about me or him and what we said or how we look, that gossip is just as, hey, don't tell me you don't do it. I know you do it. I know you do it. I know you do it. My pastor told me they're gonna talk about you, whether you like it or not. So,
These guys don't have a problem, they'll talk about it.
to your face.
Oh, yeah. Yes, we will.
Well, not today, because I have newer boots, but I have a gal in my church, a beloved gal who came up to me one time about 10 years ago, and she said, Pastor, your shoes need shining. Well, I said, go get it.
Yeah, go for it.
I told her, if you don't like it, shine them.
Yeah.
Well, after church, she came to my office, and she said, give me those shoes, I'll bring them back next week.
Oh,
I gave them to her. Well, then that next Sunday she came in and she goes, your robe needs to be washed. I said, you know the answer for me. Well, guess what? For 10 straight years, every other week, she took my robe home and she washed it. Just a blessed gal in the church. She wasn't trying to be mean to me, but I'm the kind of guy, probably a lot like him, I'm not afraid to spar, you know what I mean? And we have a great relationship. Lorraine's just a sweetheart. But, those kind of things, by the way, are front and center. Unfortunately, and not to get, he's gonna hear some of this tomorrow, so I don't wanna bore him tomorrow, but, the three things that the pastor is supposed to spend most of his time on are not the three things that he spends most of his time on. And I'll just leave it at that for you guys. Tomorrow, we'll talk about that in my report, but, the truth of the matter is, us pastors spend way too much time on things like this because society puts these things up as so important. But I'm here to tell you that they're really not that important. And what I mean by that is, I do believe that everyone is equal in the eyes of God. I do believe that. I also believe that he calls us to live differently than the world. Christians. I mean, you heard, those of you at the early service heard, I mean, if I had my way, I would be driving a 72 Nova. I'm just telling you right now.
Well, at least you're not as expensive as Texas.
Well, I know, he's got higher taste than I do, yeah, okay? This brother here, I mean, I will get a 72 Chevy, I promise you. But unless God takes me home before I come, I will. I don't think he's probably gonna be getting, unless,
Actually, I got it, it's sitting on top of my shelf.
oh. Well, knowing how much those vehicles cost, I mean, geez, oh man, yeah. I try to keep my standards at least, reasonable. But yeah, and that's the thing, we look at some of these things and we try to highlight certain things in our own lives. I'll tell you another one that's a big one, this whole abortion issue. Since Roe v. Wade, 1973, the church has been fighting this. Well, I don't know if you know this or if you've paid attention, but there are 2 cases before the Supreme Court right now that could potentially impact Roe v. Wade. I mean, overturn it. And now the Supreme Court has a 5-4 theoretical majority against abortion. And so the theory is in the spring, when these things come out, when these decisions are made, the theory with a lot of conservatives in the culture today is that it'll be overturned. That will be, a 40+ year fight for the church to overturn and defend the sanctity of life. We've never given up on it, even though it was societally decided that we can, start killing babies. And it's even better than that. Forget the federal government for a second. Have you paid attention to what some states are doing? Some states in the United States have pulled the trump card on the Supreme Court, and they've made state laws that are applicable for their state that protect the sanctity of life. For instance, and I forget which state, maybe you know, there's a state that's just approved a new law that as soon as there's an identifiable heartbeat, which we know to be within the first 7 to 14 days of conception, is, one of those southern, one of these Bible thumping states, you gotta love these Baptists, boy, they love the law.
Praise the Lord.
You got it. That's the whole point, right? We get so offended. By the way, who's our greatest ally in social issues in the United States today in our church life? What other denomination is our greatest ally? That the Lutherans don't like it, by the way. We just don't like it. Because historically, we've not been very friendly with this group. Rome. Catholics. You Lutherans don't even like to say the word. That's the problem. They are our greatest ally in social justice, in abortion, fight against homosexuality, sanctity of life, all these things. Rome is the largest church in the world. If we lose the brotherhood and sisterhood of Rome, Missouri will be by itself in the public fight for these social issues. I'm telling you, our greatest ally is the Roman Catholic Church.
The problem with the Baptist church is that they're not organized enough.
Right.
It's kind of like what we've talked about before.
Yes.
Back in 2004, there were 683 different recognized denominations of Baptist church. So the unity of the Baptist church isn't there. And so that's why while they may be strong when they talk about it, there just isn't the unity to have the power to be able to deal with these subjects.
And he's 100% right, which is why it's beneficial for us to be in a partnership in these social issues with the Roman Catholic Church, because they are ultra organized. And they also have a hierarchical system in the sense that if the Pope makes a statement, the whole shooting match isn't aligned with it. So the movement, societal movement happens a lot easier in the Roman Catholic Church. Not that we have a dictatorial kind of system in the Missouri Synod, but we have a very clear communication system in the Missouri Synod too. And so when we want to make movement in this way too, we make the declarations and we move. And so yeah, he's right. That's the reason why the Baptists aren't our greatest ally. They're an ally. Don't get me wrong. They're an ally. But the greatest ally is the Roman Catholic Church. And I think ultimately we shouldn't ignore that. Now look, I'm not promoting that we go and worship with them or nothing like that. It's just the point that, in social ways, there are many things we can do together for the sake of the gospel. Many, many good things. One of the biggest ones on the plate today, and since you brought up this whole homosexual thing, is adoption. Have you heard about this situation? Some of our Lutheran adoption agencies are running into federal cases because they won't adopt children into homosexual couple families. And so our Lutheran social service agencies are being threatened by the federal government to pull their federal funding because of their policy that they won't adopt children into openly homosexual relationships. And this is another one of those issues that they hold money over our head, like you said, they hold money over our head to get us to conform, right? Do what we tell you to do, otherwise we'll pull funding from you. And some of these organizations we have in the church are fully funded, I don't want to say fully, but the majority funded by federal dollars. And so when they do that, they pull your purse strings, they really put you in a bad way. Illinois is one of those areas that we have, that happens, you know. New York is another big one. It's always these big cities, you know what I mean? I mean, these big cities, they just get so many people in them. And oh, by the way, another problem societally when it comes to this is, do you know that early on in church history, the church was responsible for many of the social programs that the federal government puts out today? Food banks, clothing banks, shelters, all these things that society needs, the church used to provide. Right? What happened? The church started to run into what? Money problems. And so the government, we're going to take it up. And it became a love your neighbor, biblical kind of Matthew, love your neighbor as yourself stuff. It became a governmental, responsibility. What happened when it became a governmental responsibility was the government, attached themselves to doing what for what group of people. Think about it. If you get on social assistance today, what is your motivation to get off of it? None. I ask myself all the time, why don't I just sit home, put my feet up, watch Jerry Springer, and collect my check? You know what I mean? Because there's no motivation. Look, social assistance, food stamps, and they're wonderful programs. And they're designed for a specific reason.
And they're all abused.
That, you said it, I didn't. What's your name?
Jerry, right?
That was Jerry. No, but you're right, 100% right. And that is the problem. Every good thing in this world we find as human selfish people to do what with them? To abuse them, And I try to explain that to people because even within the church, in my time as district president, I've not had to endure this. But early on in the life of the districts, we used to do mission planting where the district paid the churches to plant churches. It wasn't that long ago, 15, 20 years ago, the district had in its budget $100,000 for, Grace Church to plant itself here, and every year we give the church $100,000. We don't do that stuff anymore. And part of the reason we don't do that stuff anymore is because congregations got used to the district giving money to them, that they never became self-sufficient. And so when the district started to pull their funding away from these churches, the churches started getting angry because we've lived off of these subsidies for so long, and then the district became the evil empire because we were taking away their bread, to eat. And so the district said, we will assist churches in the future, but they will not be dependent upon us because they can't. And that's why we've switched our mission planting. So like right now, we give a grant to plant a church, and we tell up front, we give it for 3 years. And it's a declining amount for 3 years so that you don't get used to it, but we're certainly there to help you do those things. And we just don't want people to become dependent upon it, because it's just human nature. Listen, no one would be motivated to go out and do anything if every month they could walk out and there'd be a check in their mailbox. Who would be motivated to do anything? And by the way, a lot of states have figured this out, and they have programs, like in Michigan, they have this program called, it's just called Works. Michigan Works, where if you get on these federal programs, they put you on for a time, and then they force you into a working situation. And my grandfather used to tell me all the time, there's a lot of highways that need to be cleaned. You don't have to be criminal to go do that stuff. I got to tell you, if I wasn't a pastor, I'd probably be a farmer. And the reason I'd be a farmer is because a farmer, like a pastor, has a purpose every morning when they get up. And what's that?
Pray for harvest.
Yeah. What did you say? Pray for rain?
Pray for rain.
But no, it's harvest. It's whether you're a crop or an animal farmer, you have a purpose every single day. Especially animals, cows, or you have a purpose every day. My uncle was a dairy farmer. And, I said to him, do you ever take vacation? He goes, rarely, because my cows are the most important thing to me. And so, much like a pastor, we get up every day, we have a purpose. Not that I'm associating you with animals, but I'm not.
Now we know where we stand.
Yeah, I know some of you who are smart, probably, he's calling us cows. No, but we have a purpose, and it's God's people. It's God's people. We have a purpose. And I, like I say, if I wasn't a pastor, I'd probably be a farmer. Because for me, I've just grown up in my life with purpose and with duty and with obligation. And, while I truly enjoy gifts and the like, those are not things that are expected. And so when you have a purpose in life, you get up with a different sense. You know what I mean? You wake up in the morning with joy that God has given you another day to carry out your purpose. And I think for us in the church, we really, really should double down on this. Because it was the way of old. The church taught this, that the Christian life was a purposeful life. It's a life to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, and mind, and to love thy neighbor as thyself. You see? And so that is what I've been doing as district president, is trying to, help congregations understand that purpose that God has called us to. Because there's a great need. I mean, even with the very question about homosexuality, that tells you that need exists for us to love our neighbor and to be there. Because guess what? These things aren't going away, right? These problems in society aren't going away. In the last 10 years, societal problems like homosexuality have just catapulted. You've seen more advancement on the LGBT front in the last 10 years than you saw in the last 100 years prior to that.
Television glorifies it.
Well, yeah, that's part of it, right? Television
And the
glorifies
kids
it.
see that, and they don't.
And the other thing too is, as I said in my sermon, parents do not put their kids in their place, in the sense of, right now the biggest one we're dealing with, that I'm dealing with in the church, is transgender. It's not homosexuality, it's gender identity. Oh yeah, it's the biggest one. I'm on the public school board in Pennsylvania where I'm at. And I had that job before I became district president, and I've tried to quit 7 times, and the superintendent won't let me. And right now we're in the middle of a $100 million building, and I do all the finance. But I'm very attuned to this, because gender identity starts at home, in the sense that it's not wrong for a young boy to want to dress in a dress, let's say, but it's wrong for a parent to tell that young boy that he should be a girl. You see the difference? There's a difference. And this is where society has really made mistakes, is, you're right, we glorify sin. Or not necessarily always sin, but we glorify things that aren't meant to be glorified. I mean, back in the day, and I say this not that long ago, when I was a youngster, in the 70s, 80s, on TV, for you to say the word damn, or even, forgive me, the word shit, was SEC fines, right? Today, the words that are on cable television are free-for-all, right? It's free-for-all. It's just the way it is. And so you're right, things have become glorified that young kids would have never heard or seen until their adult life. And so by the time they heard and saw those things, they would have built up their own personal defense for it. But now, because they're being flooded at a young age, and they don't have a defense for homosexuality, transgender, all these things, they just get what they're taught, which, by the way, public schools today, I'm blessed because in my township, we actually have a literature curriculum that teaches the Bible in Peters Township.
Wow.
And by the way, why I'm lucky, because before I became on the school board, I was the one asked to review the textbook by the school board. And I reviewed the textbook, and it was fantastic. Now, it depends on who teaches it, okay? Because the gems of the textbook that we use are all in the side bubbles. Like our Lutheran theology is in this textbook all over the place, but in the side bubbles, not in the main text. So if the teacher highlights the side bubbles, they're going to be doing Lutheran catechesis. Those kids can come to my congregation and take instruction and become members of the church overnight. But I can't control who teaches it. See, that's the other thing. But I will tell you that the fact that it's in the curriculum is a great thing. It's a great thing.
Our challenge that we have here in Elyria is that LGBTQ has really infiltrated the school. In fact, what you find out is that the churches that are heralded in this area, one of them's right next door, and we've got one downtown that has a bigger rainbow flag than the cross.
Yeah.
And the problem is that we've had a big fight here with the whole idea of it being indoctrinated into the school. So we're fighting that.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I'll give you a personal story here. I've had, in the last 7 days, I've had to deal with a family member of mine committing suicide. And the funeral was yesterday. And ahead of the funeral, it happened to be in one of our churches that the funeral was gonna be, okay? And I called the pastor up because the obituary for my relative, it said, so-and-so is enjoying heaven with Jesus. And I called the pastor of the church where the funeral was gonna be, and I questioned him. I said to him, I'm not comfortable. Well, what I said to him was, I asked him if he was a part of the preparation of that obituary. Because, do you go with your families to the funeral home?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Depends on.
Schedule and stuff.
Yeah.
Most of the time I go with my families to the funeral home, and so, if they've already written an obituary, for some older folks, they've already written their own obituary and it's already ready. But death doesn't always come at our schedule, and sometimes families are writing the obituary there at the funeral home. And so when I'm with them, I don't say too much, but they ask me, how does this sound from a theological perspective? So I called this pastor, and I wasn't angry with him, I just asked him a general question. He said, no, I wasn't a part of writing the obituary, and we just had a very collegial, brotherly conversation about the funeral. Well, this guy's friends with the family member, a family member of the family member that took their own life. And that person called me. The pastor told my family member that I called him and asked him about that. Well, my aunt called me, and she was not happy with me. And yet, I can't let go of my vocation and my conviction just because somebody else doesn't like it, or doesn't feel good about it, or doesn't want to believe what the scriptures say about something. And this is part of the societal problem, right? And I said this morning to a certain degree, we only want to agree with Jesus when it agrees with us, right? We only want to accept what the Bible said when it makes us feel good. If God says you shall not, and we want to, then we're going to argue with God why he said you shall not. You see what I mean? If God said you shall not eat chocolate chip cookies, I'd be over it, right? It'd be done for me. That's it. For me, that's the unforgivable, right? And I think that is one of the things we fight in the church the most. I think all pastors would tell you. What do you think? The idea that people believe their interpretation is more valid than the Word of God itself. That's the rubber hitting the road. And I think in denominational theology, that's where it comes, really forefront. And I think, if you fight anything in the church today, you're going to find that the people that believe that their opinion is more important than the Word of God, that's the problem. And that, by the way, that's where church conflict comes the most. Whenever I go into a congregational setting and there's conflict in the church, 9 times out of 10, it's somebody in the church that disagrees with the Word of God. And who do they go after when they disagree with the Word of God? The pastor. Because he's the representative of God in that place. So if God says a man and a woman should be married, and I have a daughter who's gay and wants to marry her life partner, and the pastor says no, he's not going to do it, who do I get angry with? Not God, but him. You know what I mean? And that's a sad reality, right? It's a sad reality that people who disagree with the Word of God would then attack the messenger of what God said. And this is just par for the course. Think back to the Old Testament story where the rich man was in hell, and he asked Father Abraham to send Lazarus to dip his finger in water, to touch his tongue to quench his thirst. And he says to Father Abraham, Father Abraham, send Lazarus back to my family, because if they see someone who comes back from the dead, they will believe, and they won't have to come and inherit hell like I have. And what did Abraham say to him? They have the prophets, and they still don't listen, because their interpretation is more than the Word of God, right? So this is not a new phenomenon. My grandmother, God bless her soul, she died at 99. And Grandma Chloe said that she wasn't going to the Lord until she had a pastor in the family. I was ordained December 10th of 2000. Grandma died in January 2001. Before she died, I asked her, I said, I thought Simeon was the only one that had that deal with God, that they weren't going to go see the Lord until an event happened. In the case of Simeon, he held the Messiah, And Grandma says, well, that's what prayer does for you, she told me. By the way, I'm not the only now. We have 5 in my family who are pastors, but I was the first to my grandmother, great-grandmother, And you know, it was very important to her, the family. She was responsible, Grandma Chloe was responsible directly for 173 direct descendants from her 5 kids, the grandkids. I was a part of the great-grandkids, and my son, my oldest, Noah, was the first great-great-grandson, and she was alive when Noah was born. She was responsible at the time of my confirmation for 173 in the church, the entire family. To this day, we're well over 200 from that descended pool, and the vast majority, almost all of them, are still in the church at some capacity. My brother is the vice principal at Lutheran High School North in Detroit. You know, my sister works at Lutheran Hospital. You go down the list, the whole family at some level. And that's why when you hear that passage, the faith of your mother Eunice and your grandmother Lois, or that might be reversed, Lois and Eunice, and now that faith resides in you. Faith is generational in this sense because, like you said, we teach it. It's a part of our life culture. You know, we wonder why there's not a lot of young people in the church, because when it comes to young people, we've gotten soft. When I was young, my father, if I said I don't want to go to church, he'd laugh at me. So you know what we used to do? Here's the story of my life. My brother and I were 11 months apart, so we were 3 years older than my sister. So when we were like 10, she was 7, so we would send her into my mom and dad's room to unplug the alarm so they would sleep through it so we wouldn't go to church. Because if she got caught, they wouldn't discipline her. But if Tim and I got caught, it was off with his head, you know? And then by the time I was 15 years old, I was beating my parents to church. In the sense of I wanted to be at church. And part of that came because I watched my father. My father never lectured me one time. And my father's dead now, but he never lectured me one time about faith. We never sat down at a table and he talked to me about faith. I watched how he lived. And he lived as church was number one. Every night, he lived across the street from the church. Every night he would walk the church, pretty big campus, check all the doors. And I used to this big fellow used to hang onto his leg when we were going through the sanctuary because we had a crucifix and I thought Jesus was going to talk to me, you know, when the church was dark. By the way, what do you think my vicarage office was? I had to go through the sanctuary every day. I don't want to hear it, Lord. I don't want to hear it, you know. But he checked the church. He was a trustee. He was an elder. And by the way, my own personal stewardship comes from the example that my parents set, but never told me in terms of giving. Their giving was always the first thing that they did before anything else. That they told us. They never told us how much, and all this stuff. But they told us that the first things we do is return to God on thankfulness. That is my personal stewardship to this day, not because my parents lectured me, but because I watched the example of my parents. And so, you know, the question is always asked, well, how do we keep kids in the church? Well, if you have faithful parents, that's the first way to start. Okay, that's the start. Doesn't mean it's guaranteed, but that's the start. And guess who, in my parish life, who the strongest example is for most of my kids in my church? Is the grandparents. I have two families where the children don't come to church, but the grandmother and grandfather go and get the grandkids, and they bring them to church. And I tell you what, that scenario has produced 2 church workers in my life, in my church. You know, so you never give up on the kids. I mean, you know, Alex, my first confirmand, he's up there in Lakeview. We'll see him tomorrow. My first confirmand, I told him when he was 9 years old he's going to be a pastor. And he laughed at me. Well, guess what? He's been serving now for 2 years and he's doing fantastic.
That's why our preschool is so important.
You got it. You got it. And I was at a church, Eric Carlson, my former associate out in St. Louis, Missouri. I go to his parish about a month ago, and I'm preaching like I did for you today, and I'm shaking hands, and this little guy comes out. He's about a 13-year-old. He broke his foot in football. He's on one of these carts, you know, he's got his knee up, and he's rolling it over. And he just had, I'm sure you've seen this, he just had something, and the Spirit was resting on him. And I said to him, I said, hey, young man, what's your name? Freddie. I said, hey, Freddie, I said, you going to be a pastor when you grow up? I've never thought about that. I said, well, now you will. I said, the Spirit rests on you. I see it. And you should serve the Lord in the church as a pastor. So the next week I went to the pastor's conference with Carlson, and I was telling this story. And Eric yells out from the back, he goes, you're not the first one that said that to him. The point is, us pastors can kind of see the Spirit resting on people. You know what I mean? And you should encourage people to serve the church if you see it. So, all right, any final questions? I think time is coming to an end here.
Do we have sufficient number of people coming up to the church?
No. Pat, you mean preparation for service? No. No,
How can we increase it? What can we do to increase?
Are you available?
I wish.
Yeah. I went to a seminary with a guy who was 70, and David Scare, you had Scare.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
David Scare came into class and he goes, "Well, Rick, I'll be at your ordination on Friday, and then your retirement on Sunday." But this guy was 70, and he served for 12 years in the church.
Does Missouri Senate ever do like online classes, so you
Yeah.
don't have to?
It's all on the table right now. I will simply tell you this, we already have it. We already have online classes. The problem is, you have some accreditation issues. You can only do so many things. We're in the middle of investigating how to do it. But to answer your question, both seminaries, St. Louis has traditionally been 2-to-1 to Fort Wayne in terms of turning out residential pastors. This year, it's about 45-45. 45 at Fort Wayne, 45 at St. Louis. Not good. When I graduated, it was about 45. What was that when you graduated from Fort Wayne?
We had almost 100.
Yeah, so you had, that was the years that but we have more guys going through the specialized ministry preparation right now, which is the online type style. The problem with that is they have limitations. They can't do certain things in the church. They're always under supervision and all this other stuff. So I'll tell you this much. It's the #1 thing on the agenda. Every council of presidents meeting, we talk about it. But the easiest answer for you people is, here at this church, if you see somebody who the Spirit rests on, encourage them to serve God in the church. He will provide. He will provide. So, all right, it's been a pleasure. It's great to see you. And just last thing I want to say to you is keep fighting the fight. Just stay at it, and stay at it with joy, because the Lord will bless. And don't ever look at your neighbors, like you say over here, and compare yourself. God has given you ministry to do here, and be thankful for what He's asked you to do, and be joyful. And I tell all my churches, be the best at what you do, whatever that is. Be the best at what you do. I appreciate it.
All right. So we'll begin with the benediction. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make His face shine upon you, be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up His countenance upon you and give you His peace. Amen.
When my mother and dad were going together, my mother was a Lutheran. He was
I really didn't intend to be the only one.
I got one like you at church.
That's how
So
our
does it.
family
Yes,
got. My mother was always, and when my brother and dad got married, then he joined us. That happens a lot. Okay.
My husband stayed Catholic.
My wife was Methodist, and she come here, and we were in the old church.
Oh.
And her and I became the first ones married in this church. 51 years ago.
All my 4 children
We've got a minister. Yeah, our oldest boy's a minister down by Cincinnati. And another one, boy, he's the one